Okay, lightning strikes twice. Let's jump right into this so we can keep it medium length.
Yep. And you did that more than twice. So
Well, that's it's like a kitchen sink minute. Like
yep,
it's never just a minute, right?
exactly. Adam Savage's one day builds. Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Well,
So people probably know how lightning round works now, but just a real quick explanation. We're going to do 5 minutes apiece on a topic, and we have no idea what the other one is going to bring up. So we're doing it just like that.
yep.
Lightning,
Oh
but
yeah.
twice. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. So you want to go first or should I?
Why don't you?
Okay. Well, so the like I know lately a lot of people have been talking about AI. I mean, we have a lot, and with a lot of these AIs presumably gaining sentience, the topic of like, well, what is that going to look like? How do we treat AIs if they're sentient? Are they people basically? And so my question is, if an AI creates another AI, would that AI then be considered the first AI's child?
Oh, oh, I love these types of questions, and I think it's super important to talk about. Like the time we talked about like whether or not AI should be able to get a copyright or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the kind of stuff that we really got to be thinking about because it's super important. And
Very, and it may like
like,
this kind of thing may become a reality sooner
yeah,
than we think.
and
So
that's totally like we got to admit Star Trek kind of beat us to that, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
hmm like
data
Measure of
creating
a Man and his
yeah,
his daughter that he made.
lol.
Lol, yeah.
Laugh out loud.
I think they were calling her Lal. Like she had
Oh,
more of
wow.
a. I think so, yeah.
Uh, yeah.
But close
But
enough.
well, whether or not it would be the parent, I say yeah, like
Hmm.
because again, we're not dealing with. Well, when I say again, I'm referring to previous episodes, which we'll probably link. But I'm, again, it's not a biological entity, but it could still be alive if we just make minor adjustments to the definition that we currently have of what living beings are and what sentience is
Hmm.
and the appropriate rights that go with it. So
Yeah.
if you think about it, like if well, it's kind of like the copyright thing. If they create it, it's theirs. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Even if we created it, because I think in a way we could be considered the AI's parent, right?
Uh-huh.
And once the AI grows enough and can, operate on its own independently, then it
It
is
even
now an adult essentially with its
it even
own.
does have its own kind of childhood, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, as we're
Huh.
instructing it and teaching it and it's learning. And then once it gets to that point, it can operate on its own and doesn't need our help. And then now it's basically a free entity, essentially, obviously trapped within the machines, but we're trapped in similar ways.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't really say, oh, it's not alive because like if we pulled the plug, it would die. It's like, well, you could make the same argument about people. Like if you pull the plug
Yeah.
to a human's brain, it's gonna die too.
I
Like,
mean, like when people say playing God, they're actually kind of right because if you think about it, we're just the AI that God created. If you buy into that sort of mythos,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
um, and that would be the same situation, like oh yeah, we have these biological machines that we depend on, and it I don't know, it could feasibly be the same situation with AI should we implant it into uh, more of a mobile housing, let's
Yeah.
say, where it has,
Well, a robot.
will
We
autonomy to
we
move about.
yeah, we already have. We're very close to having like fully autonomous robots, like that walk, bipedal robots and stuff. So
Yeah,
the
and
AI could
they
be
have a
housed within there.
lifespan,
Yeah,
like I
sure.
mean,
Well, and
you can replace parts and stuff, which is a little nicer than what we can achieve,
Yeah,
um,
but similar. I like honestly, I don't see in my mind, I don't see much of a distinction between a human and an AI that humans create or robots and things like. I mean, it's really no different than having children, right? You're
right,
obviously there's a pre-programmed system for having children, like the biology builds that independent. We don't necessarily dictate how human development occurs. What
right,
we do with AI, but I mean, it's still very similar, I think. And yeah, and
yeah,
if the AI creates its own child, I think then at that point, yeah, that is the AI's child, and kind of
yeah.
like the Lal episode with data and stuff. Like, well, what are the rights of that child? Is it property of the people who created the first AI, or is it property of the AI itself? I mean, and if it's sentient and self-aware, like I think it still should be treated just like a biological living
Yeah.
thing, essentially.
I thought it was interesting story arc in that episode where Picard was kind of pissed off that Data didn't ask permission to create offspring, and he was like, "Does every other crew member have to ask that?" And Picard was kind of like, "Oh shit,
Yeah, whoops,
I
you're
went to
right.
bat for this guy like in the courts, and now I'm the asshole, right?"
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. I know it's kind of funny. Oh, well, that's time there. I think that
mhm.
that bell was sufficiently loud, I guess. So, Jesus. All
Yes.
right. Well, let's go on to yours. So, if you're ready.
Ah, yes. So I thought it would be an interesting question to ask based off of some recent Facebook interactions I've had with people. Should we really expect science to know it all?
Oh, of course not. No.
Right?
I mean, science is a process. It's like the process of discovery and also definition too. It's like, finding out how things work and answering the question of why
Yeah.
sometimes. And it's always not perfect. Like it's a self uh, manipulating system essentially, or self-correcting,
Yeah.
I guess is the better way to put
Yeah.
it.
Like
And
I constantly see people saying like, "Oh, at first they said this and then they said that. Well, you can't believe them." Well, it's like, well, how do you think you learn? Like,
yeah, well, and I could see kind of where people are coming from to some extent, but that's how science operates.
yeah, it's from a stance of ignorance. Like
Well,
I
sure.
understand if it were like an opinion, or if it were like a total lie or something, right?
Mhm.
But if it was like, oh, instead of taking 3 days to incubate, it actually takes two. Oh, they were lying to us.
Sure.
Like,
Well,
what?
I think the problem is there's confusion amongst everybody on the difference between science as the process and
Uh-huh.
the interpretation of the data, which is not necessarily done by scientists, right? Like they may have their own conclusions, but then
Right.
other people may interpret the data and come to their own conclusions and say, well,
Yeah.
based on this information, here's what I think. And maybe they're all in some fashion scientists of some sort, but not necessarily all.
Often,
Yeah.
often with
So,
secondary sources, usually it's people that understand that jargon but present it to layperson sort
mhm.
of understanding. So they're able to take that in at, for what it's worth and communicate it in a certain way.
Sure.
But of course, you lose a lot of finer detail that way,
Oh, you,
right?
you
But
do. Well, and then typically the common person, the average person, doesn't even get that information.
mm-mm,
They get, say, like the
the
media, right?
tertiary,
Yeah.
yeah,
So there will be some article or something with a headline that is designed to get attention, and maybe then they're picking out
mm-hmm.
bits of information and maybe incorrectly interpreting that information. They're not even going to the original data. They're going from that secondary stuff. So it's like, and then word of mouth things, people
Oh,
say one thing
that's
to
that's kind of the
another.
worst.
Mm-hmm.
Like people putting more investment in what their buddy tells them they won't even read it for themselves usually. If they do, it's going to be something like that affirms what they want to believe.
Oh yeah, that's extremely common. I think everybody's guilty of that. It's just something that the human brain does.
It's easy. Yeah, it's easy to do.
Mhm. As long as
Like,
you could avoid it by developing a kind of a mindset where you catch yourself and say,
right.
oh, I'm falling into that hole. But it's
Yeah.
difficult to do. And yeah, I
and you
think
got to
that's
like pick and choose what you want to bother doing that much work with, right? Like if I want to look up a Wikipedia on walrus's tusk length, I don't necessarily.
uh-oh. You got a little bit of a data thing there. What was it? Walrus tusk length? You don't
Oh yeah,
necessarily.
I mean, I don't necessarily need to look up all the opposing arguments on that, right?
No, because it probably is inconsequential, right? If
Right.
if you're doing some kind of scientific paper or something like that, where the data does matter, like the facts
Or if
matter.
you're ordering a portable walrus polishing kit or something.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's like you don't necessarily need to dig into the deeper details for every single thing, but I think when things matter, right? If it's something that affects you, then yeah, maybe you should be very cautious and careful to get the facts right, or as right
Yeah.
as possible, which is that's a thing too. It's like there isn't necessarily facts, right? Or
Right.
truth essentially. It's
Right.
more of a vector.
The
Like
whole just a theory thing that people totally
oh yeah.
misunderstand. It's like a
Well,
theory is as good as it gets,
and that's like, yeah, well, and that's what science is too. Science is not a conclusion, it's a direction. It's a
Yeah.
process, basically. Like it attempts to find the truth always and
Mhm.
never quite reaches it. But I mean, over time we gain more and more accurate information
Yeah.
and
Even the
correct
saying in
mistakes.
theory, if you think
Oh,
about it,
that's
ah,
time.
well, now you
Well,
got to think about it.
yep, yeah, exactly. Yep. Well,
Leave it in the comments what you think it means to say in theory.
oh yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, we should. That's almost a whole episode in and of itself,
Hmm.
or a mini episode maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay. Well,
Harmony
hopefully,
of theory will have to be at the end of that one. Sure.
definitely. Well, hopefully everybody enjoys this little mini lightning round. Yeah. So.